It might take a minute or two before it appears, though, mightn't it? After it
Mhm.
says, hmm,
Done.
okay, I'm just refreshing.
Yep, you're there.
There's a, oh, shouldn't have clicked that. Something's happening. I'll just let you know for certain before you go. Yes, one watching. Maybe I shouldn't see that. Okay. Hello, I'm Paul Rainey, writer, artist of There's No Time Like the Present, published today by Drawn and Quarterly, available in all good comic shops and bookshops and some bad ones. And this is Why Don't You Love Me, my graphic novel that was first published a couple of years ago by Drawn and Quarterly, but was recently republished a couple of months back as a softback, and it seems to be going down critically very well, clever and uncompromising. The Guardian. So that's available now as well. But I'm going to talk mainly about There's No Time Like the Present today, and its history and how it is been 20 years in the making. So I start. Oh, before I start, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them, and I'll answer them as we go through. Yeah. So I started work on There's No Time at Present in 2005, and I was at the time working for a bank called Abbey National, and I'd been there for about 13 years. And like all the jobs I've ever had, I was unhappy in that role, and I decided that I wanted to have a career break because it was probably going to be my last chance to have a go at breaking it into comics. So typically, when you had a career break at the Abbey National, it was to allow people time off with their children or to go travelling before they settled down. Well, my application was I would like a year off to work on a graphic novel. And I think they were so happy to see me go that they agreed to it. So my original intention was to work on something that was analogous to what I thought was the misery of working in an office environment. But as soon as I got home at the start of my career break, I realized that I'd lost the mojo for it because, of course, I now had a whole year off ahead of me. So I thought, well, I need to do something. What is it I need to do? And I thought about my other ideas I had. And I remembered that I had an idea for a story about a time travel story, which is this one. There's no time like the present. So I started work on that instead, not really realizing how long it was going to take me. So No Slow Time at the Present is about a group of friends who are, I guess, geeks or nerds, um, or have those sorts of tendencies. And they live in Milton Keynes, which is the city, formerly town that I live in Buckinghamshire in England. And it's about their relationships and such. Except the twist is time travel has been invented. And so they live in a world in which people occasionally come from the future to visit. Now, the thing is, their lives carry on pretty much exactly as before the invention of time travel. In fact, if anything, their lives are somewhat diminished by the invention of time travel. So they still go to work, they're still unhappy with their jobs, they still bicker about Star Trek and Doctor Who, and they still have, I guess, rubbish day to day encounters with other human beings. Um, yeah, they have the only real advantage they've got since the invention of time travel is access to the ultranet. And the ultranet is like the internet, except it spans all time as well. So, for example, they can download future episodes of their TV shows from the future. I said future twice, just for emphasis. Or they can download records that haven't been made yet. Or if they're careless or stupid, they can find out the time of their actual demise. So one of the motivations for doing this is I was quite often irritated by time travel in fiction and how often it was portrayed. You go along with it for an optimum point, and something would usually happen to contradict something in its own logic. And I wanted to make sure that I had a clear understanding of how time travel worked in my story. So my story answers the question that some people might ask, which is, if time travel will one day be invented, how come no one's visited us from the future? And the answer to that is, you need a transmitter and a receiver. And you can't travel back further in time before the invention of the receiver. Simple. Also, I wanted to avoid the idea of going back in time and changing the past. You can't change the past. If you go back in time, for example, with the intention of killing your own mother before your conception, you wouldn't be able to do it. Because you're already part of the past, you dimwit. So that's the approach I took in the story. I'd like to introduce you to some of the characters, if I may. So originally, when I was working on There's No Time Like the Present in 2005, with that career break, my approach was, I knew the story and I knew the junction points, as I describe it in the story, but I didn't want to work all the details out at the beginning beyond the junction points, because I knew it was going to take me a long time and I wanted space to be spontaneous so I wouldn't get bored. I didn't want to abandon the project. So I had a clear understanding of the characters. I knew where the junction points were. Boom, let's go. I worked a scene at a time, write and then drew a scene, and then I'd work on the next scene. And then when I got around 24 pages completed, I self-published them as mini comics. And this is the first issue from probably 19 years ago. This is a later reprint. I've lost my earlier copies. And on the cover, we see Kelly and Cliff, two of the main characters in the story. So Cliff is a huge Doctor Who fan, and he was inspired by a character, a real person who used to come into a shop I worked in about 15 years earlier. And I found, after leaving that shop, that I was drawing this guy in my sketch pads quite often. So the character existed in my mind for probably more accurately 13 years or so. And over those 13 years, he deviated and developed and changed from the source material. But the real Cliff did, in fact, used to wear a jumper with question marks on, just like one of the Doctor Who's used to in the 1980s. In the book, I use a real life event. One day I was in the shop and it was the slowest day of the week and there were no customers. And I started to hear this squeaking sound through the shopping centre, the shopping mall. And it was getting louder and louder and louder. So I walked to the door of the shop and looked out, and around the corner was coming a life-size Dalek. And then behind that, Cliff, the real Cliff, Ford, was pushing the Dalek. And I laughed for about half an hour. Apparently, the real Cliff, Ford, who lived in a place in Milton Keynes housing estate called Coniborough, had pushed his Dalek that he'd made at home all the way from Coniborough down to the train station, which is probably about a mile and a half, because John Pertwee, the actor who played Doctor Who 3, was there opening a sculpture. So he wanted to show John Pertwee this Dalek he'd made, even though John Pertwee hadn't played Doctor Who for probably 15 years, 20 years by that point. Apparently, John Pertwee was very impressed. And then the real Cliff Ford thought, I'd like to show Paul in the comic shop this. So he then pushed it up the hill for about a mile and a half to the city centre, pushed it through the city centre, passing numerous people, no doubt, to me at the comic shop. And the reason it was squeaking is because one of the three wheels had come off, so it was scraping along the ground. And yeah, I sampled that scene and used it in the final story. This is issue 2 of the self-published comic. There were 13 of these, and this character is Kelly. She's one of the group. Kelly in the story owns a house that she's stuck with paying the mortgage of, because she's recently split up just before the story starts. She recently split up with a boyfriend, and Cliff has moved in as a lodger to help her out. But they're also quite good friends. Kelly, like Cliff, is obsessed with Doctor Who. She's obsessed with dairy products. She loves cheese. She likes milk. She likes yogurt. She'd like nothing more than to one day own a milk float and drive it around town. I'm just going to check the questions here. Any Tiffany Ingham, any on self-publishing for a beginner? Love your energy so much. I assume you're being ironic there, Tiffany. I guess my advice is just do it. I don't always feel I'm the best at giving advice. It depends what your objective is. The advantage today is I think there's a level of discipline, so you need to set time aside, but don't be too strict. You need a life. So I would, when I had a day job, decide to work on my comics for 4 evenings a week, but make sure that I enjoyed some social life. Be focused, know what it is that you want to do. If you want to self-publish, there's lots of outlets these days. You can post it online and share it with your friends and followers. Printing is far more affordable these days, and it's worth shopping around and seeing what's out there. I don't know where you're based, but there's some great printers, affordable printers in the UK. And this printing allows you to run off 1 copy or 20 copies or 100 copies very affordably these days. Yes, so get to it. Good luck. Ed Ilya, Future Paul, is there any much difference between the story as it exists in the book edition from the small press serialization? And if so, what? Good question, Ilya. So the original serialized versions, there isn't much difference, if I'm honest with you. The original serialized versions were straight black and white, but once it got collected, I went through and toned it all. So it's got a tone. Also, I think there's some dialogue changes from this to this that just accommodate it making better sense. And also, I think I drew an extra page to clarify something in the story which was somewhat muddled. Thank you for your question. What TV show would you watch in the Ultranet? That's a good question. Well, I think there would be TV shows that I'm excited about that I can't wait for new seasons of. So probably I quite like a lot of these streaming shows have like 2 years, 3 years between seasons. So I probably want to watch Foundation or For All Mankind, see what happens in those future seasons. Yeah, I think that's what I would do. I'm not very imaginative. Maybe something like really far in the future where the special effects are now out of this world. Um, yeah, I'm not interested in anything made by AI though. I imagine that'll be pretty generic. Let's face it. Um, Brilliant. Here's issue 3 of the original serialized comic. This character on the front is called Barry. Barry is unfortunately Cliff's best friend. They're sort of stuck with each other. Barry thinks the emergence of the Ultranet um, allows him to avoid work, which he's managed to avoiding. He's managed to avoid all of his life. He's been basically poncing of his parents, and he's convinced them that he's making a living from the Ultranet by downloading dodgy films from the future and selling them to other people, um, even though logically it makes no sense. And he's tried to convince his parents that this is all perfectly legal, which of course it isn't. Um, he's he's also the gateway character to me, I guess, or to to touching upon the idea of the commodification of sex that the internet, the arrival of the internet, I guess, has to some degree played an important role in happening, and the impact upon that that viewpoint has upon this character. Um, this was issue 4, and this guy is called Inspector Jive, aka Hugh. He's Barry and Cliff's internet friend. Barry has a internet friendship with Inspector Jive. They share their dodgy downloaded future videos under such with each other. Inspector Jive, before the story starts, is an agoraphobic. He never leaves the house. But one day, focuses his mind so intently that he decides to leave the house. And he enjoys the experience of leaving the house so much after his second attempt that he decides to go further and further and further from the house with each exploration, to the point that he ends up moving to Milton Keynes and becoming pally with Cliff and Barry. The inspector, Hugh, has decided to embrace life, I guess, rather than hide away in his squalid little bedsit. Oh, sorry, I'm just laughing at Ilya's joke. There's issue 5. If you've ever been to Milton Keynes, it's the most wonderful place on earth. Actually, if you've never been to Milton Keynes, you might recognise this. This is in the background here, Milton Keynes train station. If you've ever watched Superman 4, the best of all the Superman movies, it stands in for the United Nations, and there's a shot of Christopher Reeves walking across Station Square, where they later put the Wolverton Bloomer, and where John Pertwee later stood opening a sculpture and was introduced to the real Cliff's homemade Dalek. Christopher Reeve walked across that square dressed as Superman towards Milton Keynes train station, thinking it was the United Nations building. That's issue 6. Some old man. I won't tell you who it is. Issue 7, another old man. Altogether, there were 13 issues of this comic, but I've only got 11 of them. I think someone asked if I would sell them, my last copies of issues 12 and 13, and foolishly I thought I had more than I did, but there you go. And issue 9, who dies? So it took me 7 to 8 years to complete working on There's No Time Like the Present. After 14 months, I returned to the office, and was only really about 60 pages in. And I realised this was going to take me a long time. What was I thinking committing to this? But I'm quite bloody minded. So I decided I'd try and see it through. But of course, that was the most difficult period of working on it because you're not at the start, you're approaching the middle. All the time you've spent on it is going to be at least that time again before you finish it. Um, but you keep going. So when I was self-publishing the individual issues, I was um, begging shops to carry it, and fortunately, shops like OK Comics in Leeds and Gosh were very supportive and carried it, and sold it to unsuspecting customers. And I was also dragging my stock around the country in a suitcase to comic conventions and sitting behind tables that I paid money for to be ignored by tens, hundreds, and sometimes thousands of people, and then dragging home nearly as much stock as I took with me. Then, when I finished in 2012, I would really love for there to be a graphic novel collection because that was what I was aiming for. That's what I wanted. So I emailed some people and I said, look, I really would love this to be a graphic novel collection, but I have no idea how I go about approaching publishers. Can you provide any advice? And one of those people was Paul Crevette, the publisher and editor of Escape magazine, which I was a huge fan of in the 1980s, and the curator of the Comica events in London. He got back to me and said, oh, we'd like to publish it. We're bringing back Escape books. And I said, yes, please. And so I signed with them. Their first book back after what must have been probably 20 years was a collection of Gary and Warren Pleece's comic strips from Velocity, their comic Velocity, and strips that appeared in Crisis magazine. And that was called The Great Unwashed. And then a year or two after that, they published this edition of There's No Time Like the Present. It's a beautifully designed version, designed by Peter Stanbury, hardback, and yeah, I was delighted with it. It still smells great. It smells really good. Oops. So that came out in 2015, and then that seemed the end of it. Over. There's no time like the present. It's out there. The graphic novel's out there. Boom, done. Oh, let's see if I've got any more questions before I. Pete Ashton. Hello, Pete. Your work has always been centered on Milton Keynes. Do you see yourself as the Bard of MK on some mission to put it on the international map? Are you succeeding? Thanks, Pete. No, I think when I moved to Milton Keynes, it was the early 1980s. And Milton Keynes, if you don't know it, is a new town in England. But it wasn't just any new town, it had a unique architecture and methodology to it regarding art and just driving around and schooling. It was very different to anywhere else in Britain, basically, and it was the subject of piss taking in the mainstream media. And so, moving to Milton Keynes in 1982, when my favourite band were Depeche Mode, who were derided, and I was a big comic fan, which was an art form that wasn't taken seriously. And on top of that, I was now moving to Milton Keynes, and I was probably going bald as well. I felt that I had an obligation to represent Milton Keynes, at least as it really is. And in Milton Keynes, I've met so many creative people and idiots, and all my friends live here. Not all, some of my family do, and then some of my family live in a commutable distance. The thing about Milton Keynes is, in the mid-80s, we were all in our teens, and people who would say, I hate Milton Keynes, I'm moving away. That's what people in Milton Keynes would say. But everyone else in the country they were saying, I hate this country, I'm moving away. People mistakenly blamed Milton Keynes for it. They were wrong. So I feel that, plus I know Milton Keynes, it's easier to write about what you know, right? And now Milton Keynes doesn't seem that different in my mind to anywhere else in Britain. And yeah, especially since they stopped spending money on it, which was long ago. Thank you for your question. Oh, related. I'm not familiar with a MK Literature Edition. Are you part of it? Well, I guess a little bit. I take part in event. I often go to an open mic night called Scribal Gathering, which is sort of music and poetry night. I don't do poems. I read some of my short stories, my mercifully short stories, and I really enjoy that. So there is a literary, I guess, tradition. And you asked about being the Bard of Milton Keynes. There's a Stony Stratford, which is a town, I guess, next to Milton Keynes, or has been subsumed by Milton Keynes expansion, that has a competition to be the Bard of Stony Stratford every couple of years, that I've had friends take part in and do very well in the past. But yeah, so there is a culture of that. There's a culture of bands as well. Although I don't think any of Milton Keynes bands have really made it. I think one band did very well on X Factor a year or two into X Factor. Can't remember what they were called. Sorry. Ilya says, do a Depeche Mode biography next. Yeah, well, sometimes I do think about that. They're from Basildon, which is, I guess, a version of Milton Keynes, a new town. Yeah, so after the publication of the hardback in 2015, I started work on a strip called Why Don't You Love Me, which was originally serialized over 10 volumes in David Lloyd's online subscription-only comic, Aces Weekly. And then I started to serialize it on my socials. And then when I finished it after about 6 years, I thought, I'd like a proper publisher. It's been rejected during periods of that. As I said, I don't feel I'm very good at approaching publishers. And so one day I realized I hadn't tried Drawn and Quarterly. I was like, why hadn't I tried Drawn and Quarterly? They're like my favorite publisher. So I contacted them and I got a contact back saying they liked it very much and they would might be interested in publishing it. Unfortunately, the pandemic happened, despite exclusively me, and it took a while for them to realize how the pandemic was impacting, I guess, publishing. But they got back to me and said they'd like to publish it. And the hardback of this came out 2 years ago. And then after it came out, the reviews have been quite impressive. And I've sold it's been optioned as a movie by A24 with Ari Aster producing and Jennifer Lawrence producing and starring. And that means that she must have read this. She's definitely read it, right? I don't know. She must have. You don't agree to do a movie of a book if you've not read the book, right? She must have. And then Drawn and Quarterly seemed happy enough with my work, which is a unique experience, that they asked and agreed to publish this version of There's No Time at the Present, published today. This, to me, is the optimum version. It's the optimum size. It's the optimum smell. It's the optimum design. I mean, Drawn and Quarterly have done a great job on the design. It's got flaps, which you can use to remember your place in the book, but you don't really want to do that, do you? Get a bookmark. It's got endorsements from Sammy Harkham, and Simon Hanselman. What more could you want? And it's 20 years in the making. There is the Wolverton Bloomer, the sculpture that John Pertwee, who doesn't appear in the book, opened over probably 30 years ago, and was alarmed to be confronted with a replica Dalek being pushed across Station Square at him by the real Cliff. And if you're watching this, Cliff, live or some point in the future, please get in touch. I hope you're well. Well, I think that's it. I've run out of things to say, unless you've got any more questions. I have to wait here for a while because there's a delay between me saying it and people responding. Thank you for watching. I hope you will consider buying my books. And thank you very much. And that's all from us. Thank you. Cheers.